So a lot going on with the commission as usual, especially this time of year. So I'm sure the bulk of what I talked about be legislative items, but also want to note though, at our last meeting, we So that'll be a project that gets assigned through the Children's Commission's existing Committee on Family, Youth, and Caregiver Engagement. But that'll be a separate project, not just kind of thrown into the pile there of doing some polling, looking around at good programs. So if you know good programs, if you know good models out there from all the different pockets of the state, Adriana on our team will be pulling that together and starting the early work of saying, let's collect that, let's start sharing some of that out again and developing that model a little bit further. Definitely something we're going to take our time with, and not something where we're going to come from above and prescribe down what works. We really want to find what is working and make sure we're collecting that, knowing it's different in different community types and different with different community resources. And also make sure that as a part of that, that we have parents and particularly fathers engaged in creating those, which as we've learned, having those lived experience voices needs to be a part of what we do. Because they're the ones that know what engages them and what makes them feel valued in their community and as parents. So ought to be a very interesting project going forward. That came to us from the Department of Health that already does some good work in that space as well. But they know we've got connections into some of the other zones where we can really pull that all together and look at a unified state approach of how we're really engaging fathers specifically. Any thoughts or questions on that one? Nobody wants to say no, don't dare.
Well, it's a great program overall. Traveling around the state, I get the benefit of seeing different patterns of how it's implemented, Mark. It's very powerful and glad to hear it's moving on, trending up. Getting people to, our service providers rather, to get into the jail facilities locally is always an obstacle and slows the cases down so much if you don't have somebody willing to go into the local jails. So if that could, yeah, I mean, if we're gonna make a wish list, add that to it, I guess, please.
I would also add, there's an organization called UBSU, ran by Erica Saunders, who does incredible work with fathers in DOC, and then returning to Marion County. And she has been in the jails and in, like I said, in corrections for years, just engaging fathers with their children as they are incarcerated so that they don't lose them on. I think she'd be an excellent person to talk to that you guys continue to develop that out.
Yeah, and I've heard that program and that name a few times already, so that says a lot.
DCS also has an MOU with DOC, and so payment is a barrier for the virtual visits, those types of things. There's no cost to that, so there's been some confusion in regards to some of those DOC facilities where they were charging for those types of visits, but that's not the case. As long as they're DCS.
Yeah, and I know DCS has had their service standard for a long time. I worked on that very early in the day through the Community Partners for Child Safety program. Good early outcomes on that, but again, just looking at, we need to revisit and just make sure we're sharing the information that we have about what's been created over the last couple of decades there. I think be a big part of that is having that guidance. So when somebody is saying we're really struggling with this and we're having a lesser number, what do we do? And then looking at even earlier community systems. I think at our last meeting, a question I asked was, what do we think the proportion is of male versus female callers to 988 or 211. And nobody had to give an answer, which said a lot, to say we know it's probably heavily female callers, and that we're not putting it out there as a service that's making it something that's comfortable for fathers and men to call and contact with. And that's on us to figure out how we can do that better, to make those services approachable, because that's prevention and that's where we want to start whenever we can. So we know we've got a big road ahead of us, but part of that is going to be that mental shift of saying, like, maybe they just don't want to engage with us, instead of saying, what do we need to change so engagement is something that happens honestly and happens easily for them, because there are plenty of places where men engage. We just haven't done that well, unfortunately, as state systems. All right, so plenty of updates will be coming on that. And yeah, as you think of resources and good programs, throw them our way, because we've got a lot of work to do there, and we know it. So legislative items, I'll cap through just quickly the ones that the Children's Commission's worked on directly. Yes, there's a lot going on in youth justice and DCS and everything else. I'll just leave the DCS bills to Waylon. Let's give them time to think that over. A few items, some low-hanging fruit that's moving quite well. The Foster Youth Bill of Rights bill. Our partners at Foster Success put this together, and I've actually had some of their former foster youth working on getting that through session, moving along very well. It's something that exists in DCS in a form already, but it's really codifying it and elevating a little bit more. There's a Foster Parent Bill of Rights that similarly has become an element of state law instead of an internal practice, and pushing that out further. It'll also be created with cooperation from former foster youth, informing that. A suggestion we made at the testimony is actually making sure that Bill of Rights that you're giving to the foster parents and the foster youth states that it was created alongside and in partnership with foster youth who have been in that same situation. I think that would be an important element to consider on those types of things. So moving along great. Nobody's objecting to that. It's really just saying, like, yeah, the more we can make them aware of their rights and what we're willing to do for them as a state, the better, especially when they've probably been misapprised of their rights in some parts of their life before coming into the foster care system. Our bill that we were hoping to get traction on this year, Senate Bill 111. This was the one on making sure we had a baseline for visitation for youth in detention, and also that they would have time access to phone calls twice a week for both of those, of having in-person visits and having phone calls. Unfortunately, didn't get a hearing. Realistically, it's largely due to the fact that the on-ramp just wasn't there for us this year. There was a lot going on in November and December when we usually do our pre-planning, taking up some legislative time. And there was a lot on a very short calendar. They're wrapping up in 2 months cleanly this time. So the ability to get that as a new topic up front of them and have the discussion they needed to have just didn't surface, which very sad. We've already talked to you all about bringing that back next year when we do have all the time and when we do have a full year of prep into building that up and getting momentum behind it. So it's always disappointing when we don't get a hearing on them so we can only start introducing the issue. I know the author was disappointed on that as well, Senator Donato. But again, not one that we're letting go of, because I think that feeds right into some of the other items we're talking about here and the father engagement pieces and everything else. The more we can clear that path, the better. So it was an interesting one because, again, nobody was against it. It's a new topic and we've got a bunch of stuff on the calendar and we needed more time to be able to introduce that to them so they were comfortable moving it forward. So sad, but not going anywhere. Couple of other items that we worked on. We had a bill for a problem-solving court fund or family recovery court funding that would have had the family recovery courts and the safe baby courts have a direct non-reverting fund created by the legislature, not asking for money for it, just saying, here's a place where money goes and it doesn't get pulled back out if it's unspent at the end of the cycle. That bill had an interesting journey because we went back and forth and we did some research and dug through old code, older back than I usually prefer to read. I think we were back almost like 16 years on one of them, and discovered actually the problem-solving courts, which is that wider umbrella that goes under all those subspecialty courts, has a fund, and that fund was designed when it was created to be non-reverting, so that the money in there wouldn't go back at the end. And apparently it was coded wrong at some step of the process many years ago. And we were under the impression it was indeed a reverting fund for all that time. So upon looking at the original code and finding that, the error was fixed. The state had no problem flipping the switch to get that back where it should be. Basically means that we have a large umbrella non-reverting fund already there that encapsulates those other categories of problem-solving courts that go under it. So certainly good to see that when we can, that we find an easy fix for that. We still have some questions about what types of funds it can receive. A big one that has come up is, opioid settlement funds. Where does that go? A lot of these old funds were created before there were opioid settlement dollars. So now we're left with that. Do we put language in saying this one can take opioid settlement funds? Or does that mean, well, now suddenly every place that we want to be able to take those, we need to get that language in? And now we have a big bill just on adding that language to a few dozen funds out there that relate to drug treatment, et cetera. So that's part of the discussion there, but a good piece of just internal research through all the resources we had, like 6 people involved, digging into that, looking for solutions, and then finding one that, at least for now, we can be relatively content with, that we do have a home that may need some cleanup to make sure it can receive everything we want it to. But if we have flexibility at the high level, that helps all of those courts that go underneath it, so we can look at specializing for what the needs of local communities are. Maybe it's a veterans court one day and safe baby court another, but we have a little bit more flexibility knowing that we have that non-reverting fund. So, and for the big question, no, that doesn't mean that we've been giving back lots of money out of that fund. Our fiscal folks have made sure that that money was used responsibly throughout the years. It just takes the pressure away that if we're trying to grow something, it's always nice when you can save some away when you're able to do that. And now that we know we can do that, that helps that a little bit. So we have that ability to maintain a cushion when we know there's a new type of court, like the safe baby courts that's still getting off the ground, but could take off. And suddenly we've got 10 of them to fund quickly across the state. So best case scenario is that we can continue growing, of course. But good news on that one. Another one that probably won't directly impact this group, but we do have, there's a very large bill on boards and commissions, House Bill 1003, that has made me do lots and lots of reading. I would actually say the joke is when I get one of those big bills, I just have to do a little word search for the rarest word in state government, which unfortunately is improving. Just kidding, just kidding. But that usually gets me to Commission on Improving the Status of Children pretty quickly in those giant bills. And there is language in there talking about the board of the Kids First Trust Fund. So that's one of your license plate funds. That's, if you're aware of it, that's one of the old original ones that works through DCS and other groups to put out prevention funding dollars, and has a board attached to it that's quasi-independent and created in statute. So in that very large bill that I'm not going to get into the wide-ranging debates on the egg board and some of the other stuff that's in there. But for that one in particular, I would say that the Commission on Improving the Status of Children takes the place of that board that recommends preventative activities that would get funded through that fund. So we don't know where that's going to end up at. Those large omnibus bills tend to change and go back and forth quite a bit. But the idea of, if we're looking at a place where we often think of prevention programming ideas, if there's an ability to say an MOU or something going alongside with that, especially for like our local child abuse prevention councils, where we could tune that a little bit, doesn't sound like too huge of a leap for something we can do in a useful way. So keep you posted on that. Again, final products like that, where there's hundreds of different boards and committees and commissions in there. It will have a conference committee. It'll probably change and go back and forth 12 times. We'll come back around to that one when we see what the final product actually looks like. Couple of other bills that are on just kind of a general watch list for us on the youth justice end. One bill that is not moving anymore, not going anywhere, House Bill 1363. It was a general public safety bill, but it had to have some language embedded in it that is relevant for this group, and that we've actually looked at assigning to one of the committees of the Children's Commission. And that was talking about what happens when we have a child. So looking at 17 and under getting discharged from DOC, wardship ends, and we find that we don't have a parent there taking custody of them. So it had language in there about, well, that means, you know, that we need to have notification go out to DCS and the courts. An assignment of assigning wardship to DCS should happen in those cases. This is something that does happen on occasion where a family appears engaged, appears like they're going to be there, and they're not. Not a situation we love. That bill stalled out in Ways and Means. It had a bunch of other stuff in it that didn't relate to this at all, but it did prompt that discussion, and the language in it wasn't quite perfect. We've got to be really careful when we're talking about a process and the order things go in and the timelines of that. But that'll be an item that I think we can look at between sessions and saying, let's see if there is a way to get that language closer to what the intent is, that we're not having a child left, you know, quite literally on the street without wardship assigned to them. Nobody wants to see that situation, and I think we can probably find a good path to avoid those situations. And they're heartbreaking situations for the kid already. We don't want to ever have a kid being left where, well, we're trying to figure out who wants to take you, right? Especially coming out of something like DOC where they've got a lot of other barriers they're already facing. Again, we're not going to say it happens frequently, but it does happen. And I've heard multiple cases of it, and we want to look at avoiding that. So that'll get assigned to our new cross-system youth task force under Nancy. And we'll look at some good dive into that of how we can make that a better transition and avoid those kind of gaps from happening. So good one there. There is, once again, another large expungement bill. I believe that's 1118. That's moving along pretty well. We've gotten a little bit of buzz on that where people are concerned about it uses terms on expungement where it's really wanting to wipe the entirety of the record, but it uses terms like arrest and charged interchangeably, which on juvenile records, we've got to have the right terms in there. The intentions are all good and saying like, yeah, when we're talking about not wanting to stigmatize youth, you know, having where you check their record and it just says expunged, expunged, expunged might make some people still raise their eyebrows and say, what should I be thinking about this youth? So looking at cleaning that entirely, definitely understand the ideas of that. We just want to make sure it's not processed where the courts are now left being like, it says arrest. Arrest isn't even the right term. We don't have a proper cause number because they're not even entered in the right way. And now we'd love to honor your wishes. We respect the intents, but now we've got to get creative internally on the administrative process for that, right? And I know there's been a lot of expungement cleanup bills over the last several years. The goal is that they want to get things streamlined, but I'd advise if you have thoughts on that one, or if you want to look at House Bill 1118 and make recommendations of maybe some tweaks that could make it even better, it'd be time to do that pretty soon as it keeps walking through the process. It still needs to go through the Courts and Criminal Law Committee on its second half of its journey on the Senate side. So they didn't have it on their slate for this week. Next week will be their last one. And that should be a Monday or a Tuesday hearing for that if it gets slated. So if you got thoughts that you'd like to pass on to the legislators that are authoring that, that's kind of the timeline you're looking at. A little bit tight, but if we're looking at technical tweaks that just make it so it runs more smoothly, which is what their intent is, that'd be one that would be a good place to reach out on that so we don't have another expungement bill next year where we've got to clean up things one more time. So again, all great intentions and taking that stigma away for some of our youth. But we want to make sure we have it in a way that doesn't create burdens for the courts as they try to do that cleanup on their end. All right. I'll pause. Any questions on those ones as I'm running through a lot of bills all at once?
I have a question about the Senate Bill 111, hoping that can get brought up next session. That's the visitation while young people are in detention. My question is, I know that was a Children's Commission bill. Is there anything that this body can or should do in terms of support for that, if the body would vote to support that? But I know that the commission certainly is important, but having a group of folks focused on the youth justice side, reviewing that and deciding whether or not this group would support, I think. I don't know, is that?
Yeah, I think that's always valuable. And especially when something is a new topic that the legislator hasn't seen before, they're going to be a little bit shy about it. That's just the way it goes. What they want is they'll want to hear from stakeholders. So in this one, the main thing we heard was we just haven't had enough thought on it. We haven't had time to discuss it. And we would have loved to have heard from more of the stakeholders attached to it. So if you're in that place or you know the people in that place, when that bill comes back around, and again, we'll have more time. This one, we didn't even have a bill number until session was started, slows it down. So if we can have that a little bit quicker next year where we don't have things taken away time and in November and December away from the legislators' calendars, I think that'll help because I know everybody here would love to make those connections where they can, but you need time to do it. And you need time for people to review the legislation and get comfortable with it and understand what's saying and get their questions asked and answered. So I think that'd be the biggest thing.
And I don't know how that process works, but I'm also wondering, is there a way to communicate all of the stakeholder groups that were already part of that? So for example, in the commission, you have IPAC, you have, all those groups. Yeah. And additionally, the task force that worked on that had talked to IJDA and got support in that perspective. So I understand they may want to do their own, but also understanding who already it's gone through. Is there?
Yeah. And I think that's something where we could look at the next time, actually trying to gather, again, now that we know what the languages that we're going to want to introduce again, because that was still getting shored up at early December. Since we have all that, we could look at coming up with some kind of group letter of support or endorsement that we can put out. So legislators can look and say like, okay, it looks like you actually have talked to and represented the main people that should be on this list. Awesome. Great. That all helps quite a bit.
Thank you. And then my other question is on 1363, the process of transitioning out of GOC. There is already statute that covers that. I just want to make sure that, and I know Terry and Waylon work really close on that, so kids aren't just.
Yeah. Okay. And some of that is clarifying that if anything comes forward. So that's where we would love to talk more and say, is it an awareness issue? Is it an internal process issue? Is it something where there's a couple of lines and new words in there that would just make it more clear of exactly what the process is supposed to be? Because if we're still having those gaps occur on occasion, we want to look at saying, what can we do to reduce those gaps? All right. Another interesting realm that was popped up pretty heavily this year, which was great to see, is looking at bullying and online safety and suicide prevention. So actually a good cluster of bills introduced. Not all of them were able to move because they're complicated. Some of them were talking specifically about things that cost a lot of money, so it's a non-budget year. But the engagement on those topics was really interesting to see. So how does some of that flow into youth justice? Well, there's a lot of acknowledgement about what's happening online and through social media. And there's also acknowledgement to say that's not all school-related stuff. Some of that really bleeds over into other spaces, which we're aware of that because a lot of times the justice system is picking up the end result of something that started in another space, right? So they had good discussions on that. A lot of talk about how do we limit, cellular phones and other devices in schools because we know that's instrumental in learning. A lot of discussion on the negative mental health impacts, including risk of suicide that's happening online. And then a couple of items talking about bullying. Some of them weren't able to move because, again, they had a budget consideration, the idea of creating a bullying ombudsman office for the state where appeals can be made and cases can be reviewed, especially ones that happen through the schools, and making sure we have local committees there. I could see that flowing into some of our teen court programming and other diversionary techniques as well, though, for sure. And then we did have one bill that was looking at criminalizing a specific form of bullying. That's called doxing. For those that haven't Googled that one already, by the way, the shorthand, since I'm really cool, is dropping dox is what gets you to doxing. But it means sharing personally identifiable online information with the intent of creating harm to another person. So there's a few elements there. And they do have a list that they're working on of what does that actually mean. So I think now they've said, well, it has to be name plus something that actually would give you access to the person, where they usually are, a schedule of their work, things like that, their home address, telephone number. But the intent is to create a harm to them. And if criminal harm happens to them, that another person commits, you can be held for doxing, right? Now we've watched this one because yes, very common form of cyberbullying. Their intent looking at it was during the redistricting fight, there were some legislators that were victims of doxing, where things were happening at their homes and people were showing up and some swatting attempts and other things. So the swatting would be the crime that was committed by the person that made that false police report, but the person that gave all the information necessary and posted that online would be the person guilty of doxing were this law to pass. It's moving along quite well. It looks like it's going to continue to, but we have raised the question of, are you aware of how common this is among youth? Because it's really, really common amongst youth. Think about something as simple as posting online saying, hey, this person stole my girlfriend, boyfriend, hope nobody catches them outside the homeroom class and does something to them. You've got impulsive youth behavior, and then impulsive youth reading that and maybe also acting impulsively off of it. So you could look at a big downstream effect of a lot of potential adjudications coming out of criminalizing that behavior. Now, we talked to all of our groups that work on bullying on it, and everybody was kind of in a tough spot because they're like, we got to do stuff about bullying. We got to get more active and involved there. But gee, where's the line for criminalizing, right? And we've had that discussion here a lot of times. It's saying, yeah, that is tough. I mean, if you, yeah. Yeah. And that's what we've seen most commonly for sure. So this creating the crime of if I put out information and I put it out, say, on a website that I know half my classmates from school are going to look at, and there's somebody that already had a beef with that kid, and I just told them where to find them and where they work and what they can do to them to get them to change their behavior. If it's seen that I intended for them to get harm, some of the charges on this, the mere act is a misdemeanor. If harm befalls that person, it becomes a felony. So there hasn't been much discussion at all in committee, and we've put in correspondence, and Sierra, who's our practicum student now, is working on getting a meeting set with Representative McNamara to say, we don't have the answer, but caution on how much we're risking potentially criminalizing a behavior that most youth have not been properly educated on what their behavior online means in the real world and how it can cross over. Is there more that needs to happen there? I mean, we're still working on texting while driving, because last time I checked, every time that I'm driving, there's at least one person I swear is drunk, and nope, they're just texting as they go along. So, and we know that's big amongst our youth as well. So regulating youthful behavior and that impulsive behavior is very difficult to do. And where is the line on criminalizing is always very, very difficult. So I'd love any more thoughts on that one, because right now we're kind of just saying, think while you're doing this. You might be thinking about 24 adults, but I'm thinking about 20,000 youth.
Like that, by the time you get to hearing, students in the hearing, and the parents in the hearing, reasonable minds prevail many times, and no one ends up catching a charge, if you will, or the juvenile process. Sometimes you just kind of find yourself in a little bit of counselor almost, like, this has gotten way too serious. And then the parents start, well, we've always had a good relationship. And then it just kind of, look, are you even seeking to convince them? No. I mean, then they kind of fall apart.
Yeah.
Right there in the hearing. But I think it's good because in a way, although it's not, it can be a pain in the trial court, but I think it does solve the issue, and at least prevent someone from picking up multiple juvenile delinquency petitions.
Yeah. It does give a tool.
Yes.
And right now we're lacking with some of that, especially when it's something done via social media, et cetera. So yeah, I think there'll be more to come on that. And again, we'll look at some broader discussions about are we properly educating our youth of what their online behavior means, because there is that strange, uncanny valley that they live in where they're like, well, it's really, really public, but I shouldn't be held accountable for real world repercussions on it. And you don't get both. And we need to work on teaching them some of that. So it'll be interesting. I know the most recent move on that is they did move it from being kind of in its own category over to the intimidation statute, which a lot of people said that makes a little bit more sense. That's where we already kind of work in these types of things. So that's closer to what we would like to see. But it is interesting. We haven't seen a lot of movement in specific forms of bullying within the criminal justice system in a while, especially ones that pertain to youth. And we've got to look at how we're going to balance that and how we're going to balance that within our educational institutions and within our homes and everything else as well. We know the answer of just put down the phones and stop posting that stuff is an answer that's maybe a few years too late. But we can do better, and we need to have all of our systems on board if we're going to do better in that space. So very interesting one there.
Oh, there's a lot of folks at the table. There's so many things that needs to happen before we get to criminalizing young people for what they're posting on social media. I see a lot of gun violence happening as a result of things that are posted, but there were so many instances for conversations to happen. There were so many instances where the school was aware, parents are aware, and more of that needs to happen and be institutionalized before we get to criminalizing what's happening there. That's just what we get to see. But there's so many conversations with school counselors and teachers that we're hearing these things that there's room for intervention like you described way before we get to creating more juvenile cases for young people. So I just hope there's a lot of voices at that table that can lend to lived experience on what that looks like playing out.
Yeah. And I think that's important because this was definitely one that, again, it came from something completely unrelated to young users. So we made sure at least we need to talk about that. That's going to be the much bigger animal here. We understand, yes, when you're looking at grown adults doing this and leading to dangerous actions where you've got police showing up at your house, I get all that, but there's a lot more frequency younger. I know when I asked my own kids about it, they just kind of laughed and they're like, "You're going to stop all of that?" Good luck. And again, what we saw this year with all of these bills on bullying and online safety is I think that crux of a lot of people getting to the point where we realize we have to do something. Now, a lot of the bills didn't move forward because they're discovering, hey, we still need to figure out what something means and what some things are going to be good and what some things it's a little bit late for. So there's that balance that they're trying to strike. So I think it's just important that we're part of that discussion. And that we're adding, especially, I think, the youth voices to it. I think this is a great place. And our committee within the SISC that's dealing with these issues is our one that we have the most built around having youth and parent voices attached to for that exact reason. And there's some things that a lot of the people legislating these things just don't know. There was an early version of one of the social media bills that specifically, it listed out what social media is, but then when it said what it isn't, it said gaming platforms. I'm like, but that's like half of it is on the gaming platforms. I know that. If you take Xbox, PlayStation, and Roblox together, you might have half of the bandwidth that's going on, and then you add things that are gaming adjacent, like Discord and all that. And again, we have people making the laws that like to create their lists, and sometimes a list is the worst way to do it because you exclude things that you don't realize might go on to that. When they're talking about wireless devices that they're going to not allow in schools, I'm like, that's great, but there's going to be a new wireless communication device that you didn't even put on that list. You added watches, but you know what? Half of those are bracelets. So I don't know. Did you ban that? It gets really tough. So again, we all need to be part of that discussion and add our own information. For some of us, ask our own kids what actually makes sense. We want this to be meaningful, but we got to do it in partnership with the youth. I think that's going to be the real key. Instead of saying that we can just legislate a way to end it all, we have to realize that this is a significant part of their real world, even though for us, it maybe isn't what we consider real world. It is for them, and we've got to meet them halfway on that if we're going to find ways to keep them safe, which is the real goal, keep them safe in those different settings. So a lot of work ahead there.
This is reminiscent of sexting when it first started, right? I mean, we didn't know what to do with it. Everybody was exchanging photographs when kids were getting cell phones. Everybody recognized the harm. And there was a lot of conversation that went on with that topic too, and eventual legislation that needed to be put into place. So we can look back historically and see that those conversations were, that then eventually led to legislative need, as you're working through that, because for me, that's the first thing that popped into my head when we were talking about that. We grappled with that for years before we really understood how to address it properly.
I remember some of that where there was the consideration of, well, if a 13-year-old is sexting, do we charge them with distribution of child pornography now? You know, there was some real tough things to say, what do we do within our existing systems to address this? And I think we did come to some much better resolution by the end of that, but you're absolutely right. All right. That's the majority of the ones we're looking at. I can say there's a lot broader stuff going on, more ancillary to this group, looking at some adoption rules, a lot of discussion on chins and chin statutes up to including maybe we should redo the chin statute, which of course I'm the skeptic in the room. Are like, yeah, we did that before and before that and before that. I wish it was just that simple, but do we need to take a firm look at it every now and then? Absolutely. That's always going to be the case of lessons learned along the way. And more so just a lot of places where I think, you know, for the judicial stakeholders in this room, making sure your voices are plugged into, because there's a lot of conversations that happen. And sometimes when you're not at the table and being a part of those conversations, they take a left turn and then you've got to come in and correct it after the fact. The more present and proactive I think we can be in that space to be a meaningful part of the discussions ahead of time, which is certainly what this group's trying to do. Now that we're wed closer with the Children's Commission that has kind of that legislative engagement arm more so, I have more things that I can take from this group and move up there as well. So just always be thinking of that. If there's a place that we need to be mindful where a lot of times there's some really good intentions out there, but we need to be the ones to be like, great intention, but if you do it this way instead of this way, you've actually added barriers instead of removing them. Because we all work in a lot of really complicated systems and they're trying to legislate across like 5 or 6 systems at a time. Unintended consequences are a big part of the game there. So anybody that has other items that they want to flag or bills they're watching this session, be happy to hear some of those and see if there's an update I can give, or otherwise if there's something that at least as session's getting towards its close, if there's something that we need to be mindful of as speaking up on.
Any discussion from the group? Questions, comments about legislation? All right, thank you, Mark. Next up, we'll start on work group updates. So I believe, Doug, you've got grants today.
Yep. Well, thank you, Justice Kenworthy. Our current grant opportunities that are open will end on, will close on February 16th. We have about 30 applications that are currently in progress. That does not mean they will convert to a submitted application, but with the different process, it does allow for a little less transparency on our end before that deadline, because we can't see the progress that they're making as they're just submitting their application and submitting their budget and then submitting the entire thing in our grant system. So that is a challenge on the front end, but we'll know on the 16th how many of those actually convert. The other thing we plan to do is follow up with those organizations that do not submit their application, find out why. And that leads us to the work we've been doing with the behavioral health group and providing technical assistance for that next round. So communities that we know of that are interested in creating either community alternatives, diversion, or behavioral health solutions, putting together groups and using our resources we have across not just state government, but other partners to have them assist with the development of those programs, assist with applications, and also sometimes just having the discussion with the communities of what are the barriers, which will help us as we move to the next round. Once we sort of have an understanding of where we are at on the 16th with who has applied and what they have applied for, we plan to pivot for the next round. And so does that mean that we will be changing the funding formula? I don't know, but that's something that we'll be looking at. Are there process changes that need to happen? And frankly, I think a large part of this is We at the Institute have done what we can to remove administrative barriers to this process. We have done our part in communicating this. The next round is really around what are the barriers that communities have within themselves. And so we'll have to take a deeper dive. Our goal is to do another round of funding in the summer, but based on what we find out from the feedback we receive from this round, we may push that funding round one way or the other, just depending on what we hear. So a lot of things in flux for the future, but we're hoping we can be as responsive as possible to get this money out the door.
Questions for Doug? I just want to thank Doug and the ICJI team for working hard on the barriers. They really have, to the extent of reducing the data collection burden on the counties by taking some of that on themselves. And in doing that, coming to those decisions, they reached out to probation officers in various sizes of counties and got input from those departments. And so I feel like there's a concerted effort going on internally to remove those barriers. There's still a lot to work on, a lot to work through, I think, with the contracting process and other things that are just challenging. And I know Doug's been
Constantly changing.
Yeah.
Not from our end, but just in terms of state processes. It's a ever evolving process
And
this past year.
everything. So I know Doug's been involved in multiple audits this month. So I just want to say thank you for making the effort. And I think 30 sounds pretty good that we have 30 people at least starting the process.
Last round we had 18.
Mhm.
So I mean, even just the fact that 30 have logged in, well, I don't know the technical terms, but essentially created an account with the opportunity and tells us that there are at least 30 communities that have explored this opportunity. And so maybe some of them have found some barriers in the process that keep them from applying. And I think the behavioral health work group can help us. And I think that you mentioned data, and I think one of the important things is we've moved from collecting, the entire institute's moving from collecting just what I call warehouse data. Did this resource get used, to now looking at how do we track outcomes? So what interventions were provided? How do we tell the story of this individual as they've moved through the system? Do they come back into the system? What's that episodic data that we have? And so this isn't the only space that we're doing that in. But it is probably, especially given how these funds are appropriated, it's more important that we collect this type of data to tell that story, especially going into the 2027 session.
Does the 30 include just behavioral health, or is that also inclusive of alternative intervention?
That's all.
That's it.
And that's 30 who have logged in, created an account that hasn't yet converted to a final application yet.
Questions or comments regarding the grants work? We still have roughly 43. Is that about right?
About around 40 million.
Okay.
Well, I know that my director of court services is actually presenting with some of your folks on March 6th at the NAMI conference over our SMART program. And they've spent quite a bit of time on that already. I think he's had several Zoom calls with those folks, Shannon Schmaltz. And I've spoken with him quite a bit, trying to make it something that other probation departments, juvenile courts use, because it's not impossible. And I think Doug's team's done a good job of making it even easier. He's reduced some barriers that we had to jump over initially. A lot of them are gone thanks to Doug. So I don't know. It just seems like something that can be maybe a clearer line of sight from some folks in the city. At least I don't think this. So I would like to echo Judge Kimberly's thanks, because I know it is important and it's very difficult.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Doug. Next up, we have data. That will be Dr. Alsmer.
Yeah, thanks so much. My co-chair, Chris, is here. He can clarify anything that I misspeak. You can see a report in the email. And also sent out with the report are 2 final reports from phase 1 of the Data Quality Improvement Project. So the first one is called Data Quality Evaluation, and it's very similar to work that Dr. Roger Jarjor and I did over 12 years ago, looking at data quality across the state. So looking at missingness and quality with our 24 sites. So you can kind of read through that. And then going into this process, we didn't know we would do the second report, which is focused on diversion. So given the state of data quality around diversion, we did 19 surveys and then 19 interviews to really understand what's happening at a local level around data quality. So it's a pretty long read, but I think you get a good picture of the wide variety of practices around data quality and how data is being used on the diversion end of things. So feel free to read through those. Let me know if you have any questions. If people have questions on those reports now, you're welcome to ask after I talk for a little while longer. And just want to also note that members of our team met with Director Hunsinger's team around diversion as well in terms of data and what we're seeing. I think the more that we can kind of all talk amongst ourselves and do some lessons learned, hopefully we can have better data quality across the spectrum. So the next phase of this project is going to be working with 6 counties more in depth on how can we improve data quality. So improve that missingness, do some training. Is there some back-end work we can do? There's this whole concept of a common data model. So in electronic health records in Fort Wayne and Ripley, outpatient, wherever you are, a lot of that information is shared with a state entity called IHI, the Indiana Health Information Exchange. So all that data is kind of pulled the same way, even though you have 90 different health systems, you have outpatient, you have ICUs. So in a similar way with justice data, can we make sure that the data being pulled has kind of common definitions so we can really understand what's happening to a young person in Pulaski as opposed to Floyd? So that's where we want to get. So at first we have to define things. We have to look at data. We have to have the formatting in the same way. So that's phase 2. So the counties we're going to be working with are Bartholomew, Huntington, Johnson, Madison, Marion, and Ripley. Many of you represented at this table. So if you didn't know you're involved, get ready. No, it's going to be great. We're going to have a lot of fun looking at data. But we're excited for this next phase to kind of come around. One quick note, I know Chris feels the same way. We have a great data group. They're really engaged. We hear from local people, from state people. So all of this work that has been done so far wouldn't have been possible without that group. So questions on report, you can email me separately. You can give me a call as well. Any other questions regarding data? Yeah.
I haven't had a chance to read your report.
Yeah.
Was there anything major in the diversion data that stood out to you or that you feel is missing or that you talked that maybe we need to get some guardrails on?
Yeah, great question. And just to be clear, we did meet with the diversion work group as well as we were finalizing the report. So there's nothing surprising to you in that report. I think there are several recommendations around the diversion side of things. One is to get to some sort of uniformity. Now, we're not saying this is how you have to do diversion. There's state statute around that. So we went into counties to see how they're defining diversion, where that data might lie. I think the first step is really for even counties to know how they want to record diversion, or if they do not want to record diversion. I think that's one of the issues there because some decidedly don't have it within their information systems where it can be pulled. So I think there's kind of an ethical local practice issue that needs to be decided. And then on our end, what can we pull that's fairly uniform to really understand how young people are being diverted and what those outcomes are? IDA is one of those that might be kind of a lower hanging fruit, recognizing that that's not necessarily true state statute defined diversion, but that's one of those. So you can see some of those recommendations there that your work group actually helped us kind of think through.
And I know I've just had a little bit of discussion in my office through our person who runs the PCMS, the prosecutors, that maybe it's something that we can pick up easier at an earlier time. So we're looking at that as part of your.
That would be amazing. And if you want to have some separate online conversations, because that is one of those data pieces where it's really unknown at a broad
For us
level.
too, we've talked about that. So, okay.
Yep. And if you want some help in thinking through setting up data systems, common data model, we can share all of that as well. That's fantastic. That would be amazing.
Questions or further discussion?
I just have a comment.
Thank you.
First of all, if you haven't read the report, especially the phase 1 full report, it's really, really good. I'm very appreciative of it because it really encapsulates a lot of what we've seen in the field for many years. And it's in a place where I feel like it can move forward because of this group. In the past, even though there are times when we'll see things and there's maybe it involves Court Tech and maybe it involves Quest, there's not like an overarching group that can really move this forward. There's some really specific recommendations about what needs to be done to allow us to have to know what's happening. We have this data in so many different places, but to know what's happening with our youth as they process through, as they come to the door of the youth justice system, and then they process all the way through. So I don't think it's as long as Matt says. And it's really written well. Like it's not a whole lot of
Words.
Factor or whatever, multivariate analysis.
R factor isn't even a thing, FYI, but.
Anyway, I appreciate it very much, the work that you all did. And I'm very much looking forward to this group using this to move things forward.
That's great. And I did want to mention as well that we are going to send out the reports to all of our participating counties within the next week or two as well. And we'll be available for follow-up and hope that they can use that locally, even as this phase 2 is moving.
I remember the report that you and Dr. Jajura wrote many years ago. I read it and it didn't have a place to go. It had a committee that I think sunsetted. It was a temporary committee, and that's the difference that I'm hoping we're going to be able to do this time.
It's good.
I also want to echo Dr. Alsma's comment about courts volunteering for this. So at each stage of this project, more volunteers came forward than were needed. And so big shout out to the trial judges who are signing on for even more work. So thank you, each of you who are engaged in any of those volunteer efforts, because it makes a difference, and it will make a difference not just for you, but for all 92 counties going forward. So proud of our courts for stepping up.
Yeah.
All right. Next up, we have behavioral health. We don't have a chair with us, but I'm going to start with Mark, and then I'll fill in any gaps for our readers.
So yeah, we spent the last meeting doing a deep dive into R factor analysis and how it cross-sects with J factors. Very interesting. See, we can make it a thing if we say it enough, right? So main work of our last meeting on that was looking at the telehealth resources guidance for judicial officers document. So I know we got that to a good point where I think they made all the contributions they were looking at that document. That's been something that's had an interesting journey because it's been shaped over a couple of years because, darn it, we keep learning a lot more about telehealth pretty quickly. So it's had some back and forth on that, but has some basic definitions on telehealth, what it is, what coverage requirements to consider, saying, this could be perhaps something to look at Medicaid or DCS, depending on where the child is in the system. General best practices. So considering, if it is in the best interest of the child to do the telehealth visit, which, checking through some of the pros and cons and saying, or is there something that'd be better to do in person? So some more complex behavioral health models. I myself did autism assessments back in the day. I'd want to do that one probably in person. There's a lot of nuance that goes with that. But there's other ones to say, based on their behavior and transportation barriers and what the complexity of what we're assessing is, there's sometimes telehealth could actually be the better modality to be able to get some accurate results as well. So making sure those things are being considered and then giving them some resources on the telehealth service codes, some background items on telehealth training and modules there. Now, upon completing that and pushing that forward, we also said, you know what, since we know it's evolved a lot in just the couple of years we've been working on it, it's probably best that we route this past the Mental Health and Substance Use Task Force of the Children's Commission, now that we're kind of back together on that, and see what they have to add for more of that community practice model and some of the resources they have, especially DMHA being very present on that group, seeing if there's other considerations we want to add in there. It's always a tough walk on these bench cars to say how complicated you want to get and how simple do you want to be. We want to make sure that they're considering enough of the variables about when telehealth is good, when it might not be good, and when it may or may not even be usable before assigning that as the modality for doing some of those assessments. We know some of the backlogs we have on assessments right now. Telehealth can be a great tool on saying, like, if telehealth works and gets the right assessment for that kid, it can be something definitely to consider, especially so we're not waiting around on assessment or having to look at placement in lieu of assessment in those situations that none of us seem to like a whole lot. So next journey for that, over to the Mental Health and Substance Use Task Force of the Children's Commission and see if we have anything to add, subtract, or change with that so we can get it to a good final form.
As Doug mentioned earlier, behavioral health is also consulted with the grants work group and is standing ready to provide support on the grant applications and so forth. And on the bench card, we also discussed a little bit about the DOC practices, because I think they have some really great ideas for hybrid approaches. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It may be someone local providing observation pieces of the assessment, and then the medical professional or mental health professional online providing part of it. And so I think I'm intrigued by that information and that suggestion. So I'll be interested to hear what input the other group has on this. And we'll segue into this on the transitional services as well. But you may have heard the executive branch is looking at streamlining, getting rid of duplication of efforts. Court Services is doing that, looking at various committees that are working on the same type of projects. And so we're trying to be very mindful of communicating what we are doing with other committees that are working on something similar or have additional people with expertise that could be helpful to what we're doing. And so we're trying to share and communicate back and forth and make sure that the information that we're putting out is comprehensive and really helpful to everyone involved. And so that's the thought behind sending our draft over to the Children's Commission committee that's doing similar work to see if they have to add. Leslie?
Mindy Pickett's not here today, but she and I interviewed a lady at the Department of Correction, who's a psychologist. I cannot think of her name. She applied for the director role, and she's not in that role, but we talked to her about how she uses it, and we thought it was really interesting because they use it to help address the shortage of mental health professionals she has it wasn't a student, but it was somebody that doesn't have her credentials as a psychologist who goes actually into the facility and observes and does the observation piece in terms of how is this child interacting with other kids, how are they interacting with staff, looks at maybe their records and information and gathers that. So then the psychologist, when she does the interview, she has all that information on what is actually going on there. And then she does her interviews and testing. So they kind of do the best of both worlds with having somebody there that works with a psychologist, but it's enabled her to save time going back and forth to the facility. And also in doing some of that work that can be done by somebody that is not at her credential level. So I thought they had a really good system and way to use that.
Questions or comments regarding behavioral health? Right, next up, diversion. Tracy.
Thank you, Megan, for doing our our diversion directory did go live in December. And I know that ICJI also put it up on their site. Thank you. And I hope it's encouraging people to apply or at least think about it. It sounds like we're getting more people, so that's great. And we are just now kind of sunsetted into a once a year, where we have a meeting scheduled for June 24th of this year, just to assess, see what changes need to be made. And we did add a link so people can update if they get on there and they realize their information's wrong. So it may become something where the courts just send a maybe once a year reminder, or every once in a while in their one of their publications, to remind people to check that information and make sure it's accurate, or if anything's changed, to please submit this so we know, and we'll just be updating it. And hopefully that will give us another way of looking at where is diversion in the state, what are we all doing, and just build on that. That's all I've got for now.
That's great.
Questions for Tracy? Comments? Thank you, Tracy. Transitional services. We have both chairs here today, so if you would like to take the lead, either of you.
I guess I thought you guys.
And if you had anything additional,
No.
you want to say beforehand. All right. So Mark, you want to jump in here?
All right, good transition. I'm full of them today, sorry. So a lot of great work has come out of transitional services, and they have been one of the groups we've also talked to and said kind of what's the next phase of life for that group and what's going on. So this has been something as we've looked at once the initial report got created and products got out the door, and saying what are we doing next with some of these groups. So we did have some discussion of transitional services and commending the great products and work they've put out so far, and say, is that something that we want to continue as a standalone committee of the YJOC, or is it something that has a fit within the structure of the Children's Commission? So we did look at, under the new Children's Commission strategic plan, we had done some revisions in a specific one of our task forces, and this might make sense by the time I'm done explaining it, but our Juvenile Justice and Cross-System Youth Task Force, we'd also been meeting with them and really looking at saying, as YJOC gets more reintegrated into the CISC, is there some overlap there, that we have two groups that are really looking at wide scale juvenile justice and youth justice issues? And if so, what can we do to make sure that we're removing that overlap and making things make a little bit more sense going forward? So that group decided it wanted to move its focus into an area where it's already done a whole lot, but wanted to continue, is looking at multi-system youth specifically. So not looking at just that juvenile justice and cross systems youth, but focusing more on those multi-system youth that are moving between and amongst systems, exiting systems. And with that came a lot of change to their language to talk about transitions. What do we do when youth are moving between and amongst these systems, or what do we do to make sure that they're transition away from systems and exiting into adulthood or other placements is done effectively and efficiently? So as we built that out and we saw a lot more of their work really moving towards making sure that we transition youth well, it led to a discussion of saying, well, what does that mean as far as how it matches up with the transitional services work group of YJOC? So upon having that conversation, I think both entities said, well, gee, yes, this makes a lot of sense to say maybe transitional services needs to be a part of that multi-system youth task force, specializing on how when children are moving between and amongst or exiting systems, it's done correctly and we're avoiding gaps. We already had one item where we noted that we want to say, well, is there a way to shore that up better to make sure that we're not having that wardship gap created inadvertently on occasion? So that's really where I think that discussion was left. And again, commending transitional services for the awesome work they've done through the YJOC, but saying, what's the next phase that makes sense? With that, I can say, so the parties involved in that and the chairs on both of those groups have well agreed to that. I think in the past, when we've looked at ending or changing or reshaping one of the work groups for YJOC, we at least like to have discussion and vote on that. So I think that's what we're asking for today.
I will point out at least one of our co-chairs already is on the other group, so I'm sure Terry won't mind having one meeting instead of two, and
I will not mind.
And the other members of the transitional services work group are welcome to migrate over to the multi-system group if they so choose. So Magistrate Foley, I know we'll have that conversation, and I will put you on the spot here.
Do to help.
Awesome. So I think we're at the point where we'll ask for a motion for that to happen. to the extent you would like that to happen and think that makes sense.
And I will make a motion that we sunset the transitional services work group of the Youth Justice Oversight Committee. Continue to work with the process. That's
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. And I just want to say thank you. This has been a very dynamic duo of co-chairs here, doing things like holding listening sessions with trial judges across the state, trying to figure out what practices exist across our patchwork of counties, and trying to figure out how to wrangle all of that into a process is challenging. So that work is still ongoing, but thank you, both of you, for leading that effort in an excellent fashion. So appreciate it.
We had a great team.
You did. You did. All right, we'll move on to wrap up discussion. So this is the time of day where I ask each of you to share what's going on in your little corner of the world and your agency for the good of the group here today. So let's start on the other side today. Kia, do you want to start this one?
Sure. A couple of updates. I think I shared with you guys that we had expanded into Vigo County. So we are at month 9 there. And so we have all of our DCS services. Day reporting is up and going. And we've established really good partnerships with probation, schools there, and trying to find this kind of community alternative for what the schools are doing. They're having a lot of issues with truancy. They're having a lot of issues with substance abuse there. And so it's been really cool to see the team grow there from community members there. We are also in month 9 of YVRI Youth Violence Reduction Initiative. We had gotten some grant money from the National Criminal Justice Institute and ICJR, who does all the peacekeeper stuff here in the city, to try to start a youth program similar to the MD Peacekeepers and those kind of things. And so it's us, it's IMPD, it's probation, and Office of Public Health and Safety, working with young people that are having the most need right now. And we are wrapping services around so the families get a therapist, case manager, intensive mentoring, case management kind of coaching. And we are seeing some really good results with that starting out. So we're super excited. And I would also say we are looking for board members. We are expanding our board. And so there's information on our website. We need more support and policy work as our work is expanding in different counties, and our work is expanding with housing. And so needing folks with policy experience, business experience as we're taking on new things. And so on our website if you're interested.
So we've had a transition of judges. So we've had a lot of movement on some programming. Judge Trevino had actually started the process of creating a problem-solving board focused on truancy issues, as we have done some data dives on our handgun cases, and we have determined that 85% of our handgun cases actually started out as truants. So Judge Trevino wanted to focus on truancy. Judge Eckenberger has taken that torch. We are in the process of getting certified as a problem-solving court, probably going to be expanding slightly beyond truancy with mental health as well as some substance abuse issues, as well as the focus. We are also in the process of expanding our diversion program as well. So there's actually lots of fun and interesting things happening out there.
I'll follow that. I have nothing. Busy. We're at about 326 kids today, 35 girls, so it's down a little bit. And I do want to speak to the piece with DCS. We could not work better than that, right? So kids under 18 are not moving. And to go see that when parents refuse, we have a lot of kids that come in with no parents. on the previous chance, we had about a year ago, it's financial. My staff know exactly what to do. It is working fabulous. So just wanted to clarify that we're not having issues.
Oh, and I want to say as well, Terry, that that's largely thanks to the transitional services work, creating the Teams channel for these acute situations. And so I echo that, Terry. Yeah, Leland, you
Oh,
really-
very cool.
I asked.
Yes, Tracy.
I know, Terry, you said you guys made a policy change the last time I was in a meeting with
We
you.
made several.
Can you just let this group know the one, the one I'm talking about with?
We do not, because I made several.
Well, the length of stay
Hmm.
and tying it only to the risk assessment.
Right, so DOC is, the only change to that, DOC is always attached length of stay to the IAS. And years ago, because I'll say it this way, because the code hadn't caught up to a lot of things. DOC kind of said, well, let us do this on top of that. And we're not doing that. So the code has caught up. There are options. A lot of that, the example I would give is alternative sentencing options. So
In adult court. In adult court, the alternative sentencing.
Right, when
That's
kids get
available
waived,
when
they have
someone's
the
an adult.
alternative sentence for option for juvenile. So it's just that piece. That piece is that we are looking at kids with the IAS only.
And 1 year, right, is what someone is going to stay unless they're not doing well.
Right, if they're a high risk, they'll typically do a year. Right.
That's the hard, isn't that what you said, like 1 year's it?
Well, that's your high risk kid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. The most they've ever done, when we've done anything, it's 2. So unless you're an alternative sentence, and we're seeing alternative sentence kids much younger than we've ever seen. Yeah, 14 alternative sentence kids. So that young man could spend 5 years and be seen. They have to be seen at night before. So seeing a lot of alternative sentencing. And a lot with younger. Yeah. So we're just, it's just a matter of the code has caught up. And we're doing just that switch. Really.
Thank you.
Leslie.
I'll just add briefly, Youth Day at the State House is on President's Day this coming Monday. Always a great day. We get several hundred youth come on down on a day where they don't have to be doing anything. It's a day off of school from them, choosing to engage civically and be there and be a part of those discussions. And we get to help get them familiar with at least that starting point of legislative engagement and civic engagement. So very cool to see if you happen to be around and see that. We're always very proud for that. We do also have a proclamation from the governor's office on the day. Every year I look at a little bit of wordsmithing in there because words matter. And this year I'm happy to say that we were able to add a line in there acknowledging the importance of lived experience voices in the state, listening to them. So for my lived experience folks in the room, that's another small win, but every time we can get that entered in there a little bit more in the states, I'm very happy to endorse that. It's a good thing. So ought to be a great day. And then we'll start up early in the morning, but around just before noon, we'll have the announcement from IYI on their Kids Count data book, kind of early preview too. So if you want to be a part of that, we can get the information to you. But otherwise, just a good day for the youth in our state.
Whole lot going on in DCS. Nothing significant that I'm prepared to, report on. A lot of stuff in the legislation that's going on. I can say in my world, the residential numbers have increased and they continue to increase over the past year on the DCS side and the probation side. And a lot of just really high acute youth that a lot of aggression where they've we can't keep safe in the community. It continues to grow. But yeah, maybe I'll have some more updates. in a couple months.
I don't think I have anything to share with this group today. Thanks.
I have a couple things to share. One is in October, the Youth Justice Conference will be held, Plainfield, right, Nancy? And so we'll be setting the agenda for that. If there are any training sessions you think would be useful for your communities, all communities will be invited, not just JDAI counties. So let us know that so that we can start building a structure that's interesting and helpful for all of the counties. And then just on a hopeful note, on the Court of Appeals, we get to do traveling oral arguments all across the state in many high schools and colleges, law schools. And an interesting and hopeful trend that I'm seeing is that our young people are looking toward careers in public service. Law students talking about being public defenders and prosecutors, high school students talking about being social workers, therapists, police officers, nurses, frontline helpful people. And I think that's really hopeful as we look at staffing shortages currently. So just wanted to share that.
A few things going on, but nothing that I probably haven't spoken about already. So,
Yeah. So we have recently, as of this week, combined our drug and crime team with our youth team. This will begin to create a criminal justice group at the Criminal Justice Institute to focus on our mission, which is to help coordinate and plan the activities of the criminal justice system, which I'm not sure we have ever actualized. But and what does that mean? I mean, this is just one step in a 1,000-step process. But Ellen and Delana will become more involved in not just youth activities, but also adult criminal justice activities. Our research team is working on how do we align with priorities of JRAC and other groups on how do we use state data to demonstrate that many of the things we're discussing are good decisions. And then also Ellen and Delana will be looking at funding opportunities. Not just our Department of Justice funding or state funding, but there are a number of outside foundations and groups that provide opportunities. And so when those are in alignment, how do we, our goal is really how do we align policy research and funding to advance the sort of chosen subjects. I won't say our entire mission, but the chosen subjects where we can have that kind of alignment on. So really excited about the future. This is sort of just one step, but also having Ellen and Delana further involved. Our research team is led by an alumnus of Dr. Alsma's laboratory. So where there's lots of exciting things going on. If you have topics that you would like us to explore, please let us know. We're always looking for additional projects. And there's funding opportunities out there all the time. It's just a matter of aligning the funding that's available with priorities and then capacity. So we're here to hopefully try to be helpful.
Fantastic. And Dr. also is not bitter about my alumnus moving to Dr. Hunsinger's. I'm just saying, I'm not bitter. One quick note, last year I had mentioned some of the work that we had been doing with Amber Becker at Department of Mental Health and Addiction around human trafficking. So that was a statewide training. We had over 40 counties with DCS talking about using this screening tool. So we know if more screening happens, we're going to identify more young people that need services. And it's very difficult to find beds in residential. We've already heard this issue. So next week, we're going to be bringing in Kelly Kinnish. So she's the director of the Child Center for Human Trafficking at Georgia. And she's going to be doing a 2-day training with 29 therapists across the state that have already been trained in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral treatment, which is a really important evidence-based treatment for young people with PTSD. And she'll be doing a 2-day training in an intervention for children and adolescents that have been victims of human trafficking. And there's going to be 6 months of supervision for those therapists. And they are in all the 8 public health districts across the state. Many of them represented here. So we're really thankful for that, for more treatment options. If that young person is able to stay within the community somewhere, telehealth options as well, just to have more services available. So we'll let you know more with locations: Madison, Tippy, Floyd, Monroe, so 4 in Marion County. We're going to be doing some focus work in Allen and Elkhart to help with that kind of pathway to care. So I'll be reporting back about this, but we're super thankful for that funding. And then Judge Dowling at the Judges Conference is going to get people together that want to continue to do this work with judges and magistrates to make sure that we're doing good work in this space. So she's continues to be committed in the adult court right now, but if you have folks that are interested in learning more, Judge Dowling would love to connect with you. Thanks.
I just have two things on the JDAI front. We have a new chair of Indiana JDAI, Appellate Court Judge Paul Felix, assumed the position at the end of 2025, and he will be chairing his first state steering committee meeting tomorrow, at which we will be releasing our annual results report data for 2025. I'm very proud that we can get that close to having the previous year, as well as trying to data on back, but in February of the next year. A lot of places can't do that, but we can. I'm not going to share with you all of the highlights because I always promise to share it with our state steering committee first. But I will say that what we are able to demonstrate is that reductions in use of secure detention have continued to not result in risk to public safety. We measure that by felony petitions filed. And so while the detention numbers, I'm not going to say continue to come down because sometimes there's some ups and downs, especially in this past 5 years, but the felony petitions filed have also come down at a similar rate. So very proud of that work, particularly on the detention reform side. We did start collecting data on referrals last year because there are a lot of counties that don't use detention a lot. And so that detention reform initiative or part of the initiative is not super valuable to them. But we have started to collect referrals so we can start looking at not only use of detention, but use of the system itself. And so we have some data on that tomorrow, but we don't have, we just started collecting it. So it will, starting from 2025 forward, we'll be able to see some trends in referrals. On the larger scale of what our team does with the other counties, we are starting to work, you will read it in the report, but starting to work with Dr. Alsma's team. Our team will be integrally involved in the building the data capacity for these 6 sites, the 6 pilot sites, which then we hope will also be able to use in all of the rest of the counties in Indiana to improve the data.
That was a lot, yes, thanks. From IPAC, not a lot going on. We are watching juvenile legislation. The one that comes to mind is 1249. If anyone's watching that may make a little bit of changes to what can or cannot be direct filed. Not sure how that's going to shake out. It may be harder to direct file a kid with guns. We'll see what happens there. And other than that, I am working on our juvenile summit for our summer conference, which is going to be about juvenile sex offenders and also teen dating violence. I am looking for speakers still on the teen dating violence piece. So if any of you know someone who either has lived experience or is a provider or someone who goes into schools and talks about that, has the data, et cetera, I would love to hear from you. So let me know. Thanks.
Just one thing for me. CASA Day is February 24th, and the theme is Advocacy Full Circle, how volunteers shape the future of children and communities they serve. So applicable to this group, I think we'll all be in our blue t-shirts in the State House. So if you're available to come and support our CASAs, that would be awesome. I think the Chief Justice will speak around 11:40. And then we'll have some volunteers and some people with lived experience speak. So I'd love to have you February 24th. Thanks.
Okay, I don't really have a stakeholder or I don't really represent any particular group. I can tell you this, I hope it's worth sharing. Traveling around the state gives you an interesting perspective on how people get things done. You hear people say, I think usually with a negative, connotation behind it. You know, we have 92 different counties who do justice 92 different ways. And so far my observation has been that's a strength, not a downside. People find awesome ways to adapt and make it work in their home community from court to court and county to county. So that was one thought. The other thought is this. We don't have necessarily, perhaps Mark's group is one place it could land, but we don't have necessarily a powerhouse group that judges can go to talk about which statutes are working and which ones are not when it comes to real world application. And a lot of the communities are finding easy ways. They've become entrenched, I almost think, in some communities, easy ways to get around some of the statutes that had good intentions, but in application don't work well. Mandatory concurrent planning in Chin's cases is just not working out as intended. 90-day, 180-day time limits on termination of parental rights cases has to start within 90 days. In so many communities, the expectation is at day 89, we swear in the guardian, the CASA worker or the FCM, get their name and adjourn for another 3 months. And that's not the intention. Same thing with Chin's cases, 60-day deadline, 120-day at the outside, at the far end. The expectation is there. We're going to take all 4 months instead of moving things towards the shorter end of the scale. There are many other examples, but I was thinking as Mark was talking, it would be nice if we had perhaps some type of a work group. I say that, but I'm not volunteering to chair where those types of real world issues can be discussed from the trial court, particularly the juvenile court perspective, to see which statutes are being helpful and which really are just causing impediments to what the goal is from the legislature. None of the legislators go into it, I'm convinced, wanting to make things worse. They always want to make it better, but sometimes the application of it just doesn't work. There's a little slip there between the lip and the cup when it comes to application. So I thought that maybe that would be a nice thing for us to explore. Thank you.
Well, piggybacking on that, the Indiana Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges might be the place for that. That type of what's happening in the legislative arena, what's working, what isn't. But I would say I agree with Terry that I'm seeing younger and younger kids committing more serious offenses. And I'm also seeing more of the trafficking. I'm also seeing more of the firearms and gun violence. And then I think that's driving up the residential facilities, the placements there, and then maybe even driving up DOC commitments. And we all know it's great with the kid when they're in their facilities, but then they go back to the same family dynamic. And if we don't change that, we're not successful. So we are, on a good note, we are having a lot of success with Parenting the Teen Brain and the Parent Project, which I think can be accessible in other jurisdictions. If you're not familiar with that, please give me a call and let me know. And then the last thing is I'm hearing that maybe Clark County's secure detention facility there's a fight to keep it open. I'm also hearing that Knox County is maybe going to reopen, but it's an out-of-state privatized oversight of that, which makes me a little nervous. I don't know about other people. The Tippecanoe County potential for secure detention facility is still sort of on the back burner. It's not completely dead in the water yet, but there's not a lot of movement on it either. And I getting younger kids, more serious offenses, more gun violence. We're running out of options for the kids that are truly a danger to the community. And so I don't know, that makes me a little nervous about our options. We're gonna run out of space, which I wish we didn't. It'd be nice if we didn't need any of the space to start with.
Excuse me. No real significant update. for us at DOE right now, continuing to kind of work with our schools and stakeholders on chronic absenteeism and truancy, still really kind of top of the list and getting those kids into school. But it's becoming much more of a collective, concentrated effort. So trending in the right direction, and hopefully we'll have more to share in the future too.
Right. Between now and the next meeting, my plan is to go back and look at our original report and how things have evolved since this work group or this committee formed. And as we finish up tasks like, sunsetting committees, I think we hear new ideas and new problems cropping up. So legislation, gun violence, detention space, all of those things. And so I'd like to hear from you on ideas regarding the course of our group going forward. So the design of this committee is to be there to be the group to vet policy changes in the field of youth justice. And so I'd like to hear your ideas about calibrating and steering the ship, as Judge Dolahanty often says, going forward, because I think that's important, not just for us to check things off the list, but to recalibrate and look at how life has changed since this group began. So also to that, and I'm going to reach out to each of the co-chairs of the work groups and just have a conversation about how things are going. What do you need going forward? What changes may need to happen in your work group, if any, those sorts of things. So I will be doing that. You'll be hearing from me or my assistant, Marissa, to set up just a time to chat. Doesn't have to be a lengthy, maybe a phone call, maybe a Zoom call, or coffee if you're close enough to be in person. So I love a good coffee. Any other business, any ideas, any other thoughts come to mind since we've been discussing?
Was there an expectation we were going to take action on this bench card?
Well, I think the consensus today is that we're going to send it over, send the bench card over for additional input. But if you have input on it today.
I thought when I read through their report, that was one of the action items they were hoping we would accomplish.
Yeah, and I think since then we had conversation with what's going on in the other group and thought, let's put our heads together.
Withdrawn.
Appreciate it. All right, with that, I hope all of you have your happiness come full circle, kids calling without needs, those sorts of things. So
yeah,
everyone have an excellent day.
Shoveling in this chair.
Nice to see you.
It's been a